So good afternoon, everyone. It's now just after 3:30, so we'll make a start. So I'd like to welcome you all, and I am Karina Poultney-Shaw, and I'm the Cash Product Specialist, and my colleague Janet King, our Sector Manager for Education and Childcare, is also with us today. Firstly, we'd like to thank you for joining us. Both Janet and I are really pleased by the number of people who attended both the first session and, of course, this one. And we're really excited by the interest in our placement programme. So following on from the first webinar, we thought it would be useful for us to hold a session with you to answer any questions you may have about the placement programme we've developed. And as I can see, you've already started asking questions, and that's great. And if you continue to put your questions out there, Janet and I will address them as we move through the presentation. So I'm going to hand you across to Janet, who's going to go through from what's happened between our first webinar until now. Thanks, Janet.
Thank you, Karina. Thank you, Karina, and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. As Karina has said, I'm sure I'm not sure things ever got quiet, did they, over this summer period, but I'm sure they've got incredibly busier, if that is at all possible, over the last few days, and so on. So thank you very much for taking this time out. We know it's been a very busy and extraordinary year. Okay, so just to bring you up to date really with what Karina and I did in the first webinar. So if there is anybody on the webinar today who didn't get a chance to look at the first webinar, don't worry, it's something that can be handled retrospectively. But just to give you an update is that the first webinar introduced a placement program, and you can see the link to the documentation there on the slide. And what's been involved in that placement program is we're very much aware and very appreciative of the challenges that exist in terms of accessing placement and the types of placement experiences that your students can have at this time. And so what we wanted to do is, faced with those challenges, we wanted to be able to create something that you could use that was a practical tool that students could engage with when they were due to be on their work placement. So, you know, having come from this environment, it is absolutely crucial to have something that's meaningful and something that will occupy students in a meaningful and purposeful way. So whether that's because there's clashes on timetables, where rooms are being double booked because students are meant to be on placement, and and so on, that you've got something that you can use that is a practical tool. So that first webinar introduced that placement program. And basically within that, you could fit that on your systems, whether that's Moodle or any sort of supporting systems that you have. You could download it and use it as hard copies, just depending on how your students are going to access and use that. You could use that as a teaching and learning program. Or you could engage that through an independent private study type of methodology. So however you want to do it, that is made up of different modules. So students are looking at the sort of, how does it feel? What do you need to be thinking about in terms of placement and preparation for placement? It's looking at professional practice. It touches on legislation and gives a little overview of the role of the student in placement, and gives them an idea of what they're going into and expectations on everyone really. So it's a nice little starter pack. We also included within that some mapping documentation, so we'll talk about that, and we also included some elements for our second year students, because if anything, our second year students now, or perhaps in a very difficult and challenging situation because they've missed part of that first year and now likely to be interrupted as they begin their second. And so it can be a very anxious time for those students. So we wanted to make sure that you'd got something that was meaningful there, and where students could perhaps think about, if we do the placement program, how is that going to help us, A, to prepare, but B, can we use any of this evidence, and how can we use any of that evidence? So what I'm going to do now is talk about how you could use that. So I don't know whether you want to do this through a Q&A, Karina, or whether you just want me to talk through these things. How would you like to proceed?
Would you like to talk through, Janet?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so what we created was a mapping document, and you'll be able to access that. And that mapping document really is, it's a sample one, so it's been mapped to Unit 16, and it will show you where the links are to the technical qualification for the early years educator. But it's something that can be used across all competencies and give you an idea of how you could use it. What's important here is the word supplementary or complementary evidence. These are really important words, because what we can't do is say, okay, the early years educator criteria is requiring these skills to be met in relation to a real work environment, but that doesn't matter. We can't do that, because of course it does, and this is a Department for Education criteria. So those things need to be met, whether it's an early years educator at level 3 or whether it's an early years practitioner at level 2. The criteria needs to be met in relation to real experience in a real work environment. However, to support those students in that preparation, the mapping document will be able to offer some ideas for blended or triangulation of assessment methods. So if there was something around a knowledge of a particular criteria, then there's work that can be done through that placement program to prepare learners. If there's work around a skill, then work can be done to think about that skill. Think about, what knowledge do I need to be able to actually carry out and implement that skill in a real work environment in the context of early years and childcare. And that's what can be actually used and put forward. So it wouldn't be unusual, for example, next time that you go through an external quality assurance audit, that some of the evidence for the competencies includes evidence that's being gained from the placement pack and the placement program, but these will be complementary and supplementary to evidence that's been actually achieved in a real work environment. Hopefully, having that knowledge and having that and taking that time to really explore the competencies through the program, when the student does have that chance to go into placement, they'll be better prepared to actually hit the ground running a little bit more effectively and be able to gain those competencies in a more efficient way. So just to make that point clear. What we are also aware of is, on the early years educator, the workforce diploma, are the aspects of the longitudinal study. Now, we're very much aware that within that longitudinal study, we're making quite high demands on students in terms of what they've got to do and over time. And of course, this is the problem. The time is the problem. We may not be in a privileged position where students can be in placement on a 6-week block, whereby they're able to do their longitudinal study over that 6-week period. So what we are now working on is an alternative, and that longitudinal study will actually give centres, so give you 4 preset observations. So, in other words, we'll do the observations for the students, and then the students will create, draw the conclusions and complete the mark scheme, which will be slightly adapted. Conversations around that are currently taking place. We're in a position where the document and the product is ready, but we need to make sure that in terms of adaptations, this is acceptable. So we are awaiting for approval. But we are working on things of this nature to be able to support you and to ensure, above all else, that students can be prepared for this, can work their way through things in a very methodical way and not have an anxiety of a rush. It's not as if we don't know. There's certain things we don't know, obviously, but there is a given now. We know we're in these challenging times, and therefore we can do our best to prepare our resources to ensure students achieve. And so we're working on that longitudinal study and adaptation. That, of course, doesn't mean to say that observations aren't important. Students, as you know more than anybody, students being able to observe children, babies and young children, is absolutely key. It's absolutely crucial to the job and the occupational role in hand. So the need to observe and be familiar with the process of observation is absolutely critical and will remain so. But what we don't want to do with that longitudinal study in mind is set students a task that actually is not achievable, and that's what we're looking at. We have lots of conversations with many people around placement hours for very obvious reasons. I just want to say that we are and have been, and we continue to be, in conversation with the Department for Education. We're also in conversation with the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education in terms of T-levels. And so, you know, at this moment in time, please, 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 if you can get placements for your students, plan for that high number of placement hours, but you can only do what you can do. So we're in that, we'll take that role of advocacy here, if you like, and we will negotiate and we will do our best to make sure that those messages are heard. For now, I think all you can do is plan for the placement hours. When it comes to our existing qualifications, we've had confirmation that the DFE are looking for competencies. They're looking for skills to be met and for assessors to be satisfied with the sufficiency of that. And we're just now waiting to make sure that we've got an equal playing field in terms of the T-level and what messages we need to share if you're actually involved in a T-level. But I think the messages really for this moment are clear. Make the planning, so the intention to actually have your placement as it would normally be, and then we work with what we can, and that's the situation we're all in. So that's a clear message there, and we are waiting for further information from the Institute. Karina, do you want me to hand you back now? You were going to say something, I believe, about health and social care and supporting teaching and learning. Thank you.
Thank you, yes. Thanks for that, Janet. So yes, we have been working away behind the scenes trying to produce the same type of documentation that we have for early years for health and social care and supporting teaching and learning. And I'm really happy to be able to say that the health and social care documentation is now live, and that is on the same link. If you go to placement support on the CASH website, you'll see that there's a separate page for health and social care, and the documentation is already there. And the supporting teaching and learning, we are in the final stages, and I'm hopeful that that will be up within the next couple of weeks. So you'll have your range across the health and social care early years and supporting and teaching and learning documentation available to you. And that was all I wanted to say about that, actually, just so that you know it's there. So, Janet, I'm going to click on to our next slide, which is about, it just says answering the questions in the chat box. And what I've done, okay, I've gone through to try and sorry, it just won't switch across, but I've gone through the questions that have been put into the question box, and many of them you've already answered through your chat, because it obviously so much is about placement. But there's a couple there that I'd like to ask you on behalf of our participants. So,
absolutely, I'll do my best.
Thank you. The level 2 early years and primary settings, is there an expectation that learners will still attend both settings, or is competency okay for one of them?
Okay, it's a very good question. So thank you to the delegate who's posed that question, because I know that that's on the mind of a lot of people. Now, for the students that were finishing this time, I believe there was some mitigation involved in terms of looking at one placement and then thinking about how those skills could be applied in another, and so on. And this is not a license. It doesn't carry a license to practice. So this is a qualification where we will be able to look very sensitively and sympathetically to the idea of case studies, scenarios, simulation, and things like that. So we could certainly look at different assessment methods for that. I think it's important to bear in mind that where we have got qualifications that are more stepping stones to a higher level, or where students are getting a flavour of a particular occupational role, that they are able to have some experience wherever possible in a preferred option. So if they were thinking, you know, if they're completely unsure whether they want to go into working in early years or working in primary, it would be nice if they could have a flavour of both. I wouldn't worry too much about the number of hours. We're talking about a flavour here. If a student has got a preference and they've managed to secure a placement, if that placement needs to be shared with other students who are doing an early years qualification, for example, because of license to practice, then there has to be some give and take there as well. So we do understand that those placement hours may well need to be negotiated, and we will talk to individual centres if you've got individual needs there. And also, if to really be frank and answer that question as closely as I can, at this moment in time, I would refer back to what we did this year. I would be thinking it's not a license to practice, therefore we should be thinking about case studies, simulation and so on, but I would expect some experience to have taken place.
Thank you, Janet. Obviously, a lot of questions around the placement, and I think what you've done is cover them off quite well. But one of the questions is, when do you anticipate placements will begin, and are placement hours being reduced? Do you want to comment on those?
Yeah. Well, I'll certainly comment. I think it's when do placements begin is such a difficult one. What I can do is share some of the information and some of the conversations I've had with schools and colleges and so on to date, to see if that's got any kind of support for the people asking the questions. There are regional lockdowns. We've still got regional lockdowns. We've got a lot of anxiety. We've got a lot of arrangements and organising that schools and nurseries are currently doing. You'll know that much better than me. You'll be living and breathing these arrangements. It's difficult to say when a placement will begin, but I do anticipate from the feedback that we've been receiving, it is unlikely for placements to begin in this academic year. Not impossible, but not typical. And I think, you know, it probably was typical to begin your placement sort of late October, November time, and it was also typical for second years to go into placement while first years were settling and so on. That has certainly been interrupted in the majority of cases. There are colleges and schools that are and training providers that are telling us that placement is unlikely to begin until January 2021. So this is also a consideration. And that was another sort of push to look at this placement program, because students need to be preparing in some way for this. And people have also shared their thoughts around how the placement, how the model for placement will take place. Some are quite adamant that the 1 week in, 1 week out, or 2 or 3 days a week, they're still aiming for that. I think that's optimistic, but if it can be achieved, then fine. And I think maybe in smaller institutions, it might be possible. And we've got situations where people are interrupting their typical model of placement delivery, and they're staggering students. We have a lot of people that are telling us that block placement may be preferable, and that they're able to negotiate and arrange block placements for their students rather than a continual process. In terms of the reduction of hours, as I said before, I think we need to plan to hit that maximum, and then we have to work with what we've got. And if that means that we're working with centres on a one-to-one basis, then that should be the first port of call. I don't want anybody worrying about this. We will be the go-betweens with other AOs, if that's the case. If we need to have a common working party, and with the DFE and the Institute, we know that there are likely to be differences and different challenges across the country, and indeed across countries, in terms of placement and placement opportunities. So we've got regional challenges, and we are aware of that, and we will work with you on that.
Okay, thank you, Janet. I'm going to pick up on a couple of questions that I've got in here. Firstly, yes, the only thing you should be seeing at the moment is the Q&A page, Rachel. That's what's on view on the screen at the moment. I've got a question here which is from Zarka, and she says, what type of documentation are we expecting for the STL level 2? So the supporting teaching and learning documentation will mirror the early years documentation. It's very, very similar throughout, and is contextualized for the setting. So you will have almost a triplicate, if you like. You'll have the same for early years as you've got for health and social care, as you've got for supporting teaching and learning. So there'll be 3 modules plus a level, year 2 module as well, and that's across the board. Yes, we are going to collate the Q&A, and what we will do, we will create an FAQ Q&A document, which will then go onto our placement page. So go back to that supporting placement web page, and you'll find the Q&A questions and answers there once we've had a chance to go through them. Sorry, I'm trying to do 2 things at once, which everyone knows is quite difficult. Okay, Janet, can I ask you a couple more questions that have come into the box, please?
Yeah, of course.
So one of them is, do learners still need baby experience? And along a similar line, but from a different delegate.
Shall we take that one first? So it is typically difficult for students to actually engage actively with baby placements, and we are very aware of that challenge. So in an ideal world, absolutely, and we all know that best practice is through actually experiencing things. So if it's possible, absolutely. Is it mandatory? I think we have to be flexible here and say that no, It's not a mandatory thing. It's best practice if you can, but what is mandatory is meeting the criteria. So if there are criteria associated with a particular age group, then that criteria must be achieved. But that could be done through perhaps a professional discussion where you're looking at activities that have been planned, for example, with an older age range, and you're talking about differentiation, you're talking about adaptation, dare I say that word, and you're talking about different the differences in the role modelling and the expectations of the practitioner. So in an ideal world and for best practice, yes. Where that's not possible, then we have to rely on those other assessment methods. We can't penalise a student in that way when it's you know not their fault, and we mustn't disadvantage them for that. We would try, but we need to adapt wherever we possibly can. The one thing that is not negotiable is the assessment criteria. It must be met. But if that's to be met through some form of adaptation using a different assessment method available to them, such as a professional discussion, reflective account, maybe it's some prior learning, then that is absolutely understandable, and we will look sympathetically at that.
Great. Thank you, Janet. And the other one was, can older age groups be used for assessment, for instance, age 11 years?
Okay, well, in the level 2, working in early years and primary school settings, it absolutely can, as appropriate. When we're looking at the early years, unfortunately, it can't be used for assessment. It's absolutely great practice and good experience, absolutely great experience rather, but it can't be used to meet the early years educator criteria. So if students are waiting to go on to placement in the early years, it's great experience, especially if they're thinking that they might be interested in working with an older age range or studying, you know, to go into a discipline that involves children of a different age range. But for the assessment criteria, we are looking at the early years. So we're looking at the early years foundation stage in mind there. When it comes to obviously looking at supporting teaching and learning, then absolutely you can. But for early years educator criteria, great experience, but not to be able to link the assessment to it. That doesn't mean to say you can't have some supplementary or complementary. Again, everything must be meaningful and purposeful for that learner. But meeting and signing off the competencies must be early years discrete.
Okay, that's lovely, thank you. This one's come up a couple of times actually. Can witness testimonies be used as evidence?
Okay, well, expert witness testimonies absolutely can. So what you can do, and what we would suggest, is that you don't become over dependent with any particular method of assessment. So we wouldn't want to see everything done by an expert witness testimony. We would like to, and we would probably require to see a range of different assessment methods being used. I spoke to somebody the other day, for example, and this will put it in context of the expert witness testimony. And there's two things to note really, is that they were able to say yes to students, and they were going to have a couple of students, I believe, this particular setting, but they didn't want an assessor coming in. Now that makes observation extremely difficult, if not impossible. And so they were looking then at how the expert witness testimony could be created to actually support the assessor. It is not taking away the critical competence judgment of the assessor. You know, the person who's in that occupational role of assessor has a very critical professional job in terms of decision making to do, and that's very much valued by us. But what it was doing is looking at how can we best support students, because the option was we turn those placement opportunities away because the assessor can't go in. And to me, that was, that was daft, quite frankly, in the challenges that we have. So it's thinking about who's going to be that expert witness, and it's also making sure that expert witness testimonies are not over relied on, but also that they are perhaps more detailed. We don't want to see tick boxes, we don't want to see novels, you know, that these people are very busy, we understand that as well, but it needs to be more engaging in terms of what that student is doing and how they're engaging with particular, doesn't necessarily have to be criteria, but how they're actually engaging with the children. And then the assessor, the centre assessor, is still the professional, and he or she will sign that competency off in full. So yes, expert witness testimonies have their place. Don't become over dependent on them. Use them sensibly. If you're unsure, or if you've got different advice, then please speak to your external quality assurer, or come back to Karina and myself on the email that we give at the end.
Thank you, Janet. On the issue of health and social care placements, has the list of possible placements been relaxed or increased?
Okay, so again, a very good question, and in this day and age, it would be mad to say no. So yes, there are, you know, health and social care is very wide, very broad and varied in any case. And I think where it was probably the norm for students to typically access residential care homes, for example, this is not happening for obvious reasons. And it would be wrong on all sides to actually assume that that was okay. So there are elements of social health and social care that happen in different environments. So you could have short stays in schools and colleges, perhaps working with students in a kind of buddy system, whereby you're supporting students, especially students with SEND. So that would be useful. There's also day centres, perhaps. There's also children's hubs, children's centres, if you can access anything like that. There's also perhaps having, somebody said something to me the other day which I thought was really quite inspirational, but again, this is about regions and it's about accessibility. So this may be something that's not possible where you are and in the communities that you're working within. But this lady was creating a sort of carousel of placements, and guest speakers were coming in from various voluntary groups and a special school, and then there was I can't remember now what the other one was, but it was to do with health and a health trust, so a member of staff, and they were coming in to talk about these things, and then the students were having maybe a day here or a day there, looking in these different places. So yes, we are open to wild and wonderful ideas when it comes to accessing those health and social care placements, because we know that if we think it's bad for early years, it's perhaps even harder to access placements in a health and social care setting. So yeah, please don't hesitate to contact us if you think you've got some ideas that you would like to test. We're open to ideas, but think broadly. Absolutely think broadly.
I think that's great, Janet. I think that also covers off a question that was earlier in the chat box, which is about the level 3 certificate in health and social care. So 750 hours year 1, 100 hours year 2. Will these still be expected? Can alternatives be used? And the alternatives that have been suggested are remote coffee mornings with the care home residents, or making volunteer phone calls to the lonely, elderly or vulnerable, or having a guest speaker from industry. I think perhaps you've covered that by saying that, wild and wonderful ideas, and probably best to speak to the EQA around what would be suitable or not.
Absolutely, but to the delegate who suggested those, fantastic ideas, no problem with any of those, brilliant, and we'll all sort of parasitically feed on those because they are brilliant ideas for us all to share. So yes to all of those, big ticks. Lovely.
Just one here that's talking about cash alumni. So with regards to the issue with placement, would there be videos, webinars available for learners to access through Cash Alumni to build on their knowledge. So yes, Cash Alumni is a great source of information. I will put a caveat on there that some of the content perhaps you would need to check for age appropriateness. But if you work through the placement program with the learners, you will see that we ask them to link into Cash Alumni to carry out a couple of modules of learning there. So it's a very good place for some extra information for your learners as they're moving forward. Again, I'm trying to do two things at once. So there's a question here that says, if health and safety and safeguarding requirements can be met, would childminders be a suitable placement for lower level learners?
Okay, again, another good question. So childminders always used to be used going back in the day, and you know, it came down, I think, to some liability and insurance, and so we're open to having a discussion on that. I'm not going to give a blanket yes, because I think there are so many conditions involved, and I'd need to speak to our external quality assurance team to make sure that there's not going to be a hurdle there. So I will follow that one up, that question, but it would be one to follow up with your external quality assurer, because if we can think of what the conditions are and what they used to be, and it's often the best way of engaging with very young children, for example. I'm not going to say a direct no, and I would have done a few months ago. So I think we need to be clearer on the answer. I'm not giving a very good definitive answer here. I'm aware of that, because I think there are some conditions that we just need to sort of work through. But one for us to take away, definitely.
Okay, thank you. I think there's an interesting question here. Would you suggest assessors run sessions to support learners' understanding until they can attend placements?
I think it would be an absolutely wonderful thing if that can happen. I know there are many things that determine the role of the assessor and how they can be maximised with the wealth and quality of their experiences, and how that can be disseminated to the students. But yes, absolutely. If that were possible, then that would be great. The placement program, you know, has been developed with that sort of extra arm in mind, and the best person to actually support with that would be the assessor, the individual who's actually going to be making those competency-based assessment judgments at the end of the day, because they'll be able to see straight away how those links, how that triangulation of evidence could actually work once the student is in their work placement. So yes, if possible.
Okay, that's lovely. There is a question here. It says, is there a rough date on when we may know more about the physical placement hour requirements?
Yeah, okay. I mean, in terms of our existing qualifications, we have a recommended number of placement hours, and we know that the Department for Education and the Early Years Educator criteria are keen, well, they require, not keen, they require those early years educator criteria to be met, and to be met sufficiently. When it comes to other qualifications, and I'm thinking predominantly here about the T-level, for example, we just need to be sure that there is a common and consistent message. And so in terms of a physical date, I know we're only at the very beginning of the month, but I'd like to think by the middle of the month we were able to confirm what the joined up thinking was. And it's important that there is some joined up thinking with some clear messages to alleviate any confusion. But for now, I don't want people to be anxious about that. I know it's a difficult concept, but I don't want you to be anxious about that. I want you to plan for what you can and access the placements that you can, knowing that as an awarding organisation, we will make sure that we are working with external parties as appropriate to make sure that your students are not disadvantaged. You will know when a student is competent, you will know when they're not. So let's concentrate on finding placements, let's concentrate on meeting that criteria, and as soon as we have information that is clear and consistent and that isn't going to be amended slightly for different parties and from different people, then that's when we will give that clear message.
Okay, thank you, Janet. Learners who were meant to complete their qualification last academic year but unable to attend setting, can they be given scenarios to complete their qualifications, or do they have to wait until schools allow them in?
Okay, so I can understand this situation. So if this is, and I'm thinking that this is going to be students who are doing more of a work-based qualification and not students who are moving from year 1 to year 2, and I'll answer it in that context. If that's not, if I've perceived that wrong, then please do let Karina know in the chat box. But there have been situations where work-based learners, whether they're on a level 2 early years practitioner qualification or a level 3 early years educator workforce qualification, who were interrupted and or delayed basically because they hadn't had an observation, and therefore they were deemed as not competent. Now there's some thinking to do here in terms of what do we do with these students who are potentially being disadvantaged. They're also in the chain now of waiting for placements to come in, and how long do we do that? How long do we keep these students waiting in this now ever increasing queue? And so it is something that we have been thinking about, and they need to have done some placement. They need to have done sufficient placement to be able to meet that early years educator criteria, and professional assessors need to, hand on heart, know that those competencies have been achieved sufficiently, and are happy to sign those students off. Now, if the criteria can be met, if there's more accessibility in terms of making contact with the placements that the students have been in order at the other side of the term now to be able to engage with mentors and supervisors to achieve detailed expert witness testimonies that the assessor can perhaps triangulate with professional discussion with both the student and that mentor to get a clearer picture, it is something that we would certainly look favourably at. We don't want students to be disadvantaged, but it is absolutely critical that at the end of the day we're talking about individuals who are going to be working with babies and young children, a very, very vulnerable part of our sector, part of our society. We want those people to feel like they can go in to their settings and do the jobs. To be fair to them, they need to be confident in those competencies, and you need to, as assessors and tutors, hand on heart, have no doubt that those competencies have been met, and then we will engage in conversation with you around alternative approaches. We don't want students to get demotivated. We don't want to interrupt enthusiasm for the sector, but we do need to be pragmatic in that approach.
Okay, thanks, Janet. So another question has come in. So can we use the working with babies advice given earlier in this session for learners who are waiting for placements in the younger age group to complete their level 3 second year?
Okay, so again, if I've understood this situation, we've had students in their first year that have been interrupted, sorry, not in their first year, but in their placements. They're doing a work-based qualification. They've been in different placement age ranges, but they haven't been able to be with babies. Therefore, they've got no observation of being in babies. And it's unlikely for them, without joining this long queue, it's unlikely for them to be able to complete. So if this is a work-based qualification, then I would ask you to think, again, all of the things we've just said about the competencies, it's critical. That is, at the end of the day, the assessment criteria, the early years educator criteria, are not, they're more than tasks. This is about applying yourself when you're working with babies and young children, and that is, it's a big ask sometimes to be able to sign that competency off. So that is a serious business and must be treated as such. In terms of looking at alternative assessment methods, now that we know a little bit more about the scope and breadth of the challenges that we're facing, and the fact that placements are not as accessible as we thought they might be at this, moving forward into the new term. If you have got students that have been confidently signed off for competencies around planning, around routine, around care, and those welfare aspects, then you could look at the criteria, you could look at how that could be adapted perhaps through some professional discussion and through some written reflective accounts, and also through perhaps some sort of written pictorial type assessment methods. But it's something that you would need hand on heart to feel that that criteria has been met. So I'm saying yes, with the caveat of let's do this properly.
No, that's lovely. Thank you, Janet. I'm going to go back to a question that was asked very early on in the question boxes, and that is there a networking group already set up to share the placement models that each college has currently, and a way to discuss and support each other to share placement plans? And that was from Rachel. I've left it till now because I think it's an absolutely brilliant idea, and Janet and I have been thinking about ways in which to be able to support you in a more positive way, and I think this is one of them. At the moment, we don't have a networking group set up, but it's certainly something that we can think about. What do you think, Janet?
I think it's brilliant. I think it's an absolutely brilliant thing, and Rachel, I'm speaking to you sort of directly over the waves here now. We're all with you, and I'm sure everybody on this call, we're all part of a professional network. We all want the same thing. We're all working towards the same goals. We've all got the same, if not very similar, challenges, and we really ought to be sort of learning from each other. So there's nothing more genuine and sincere than having that network and forum where we can help each other out in through this and beyond. This is a great professional opportunity. I'm thinking towards alumni. I'm thinking about different ways of creating forums and networks on there, and it's one we'll take forward. But yes, I think having a professional network, and I'm stressing that professional network. We're going to get things right, we're going to get things wrong, but working together we can try and find solutions to this, and that's what it's all about. And that's the vein I'm hoping you're taking these placement programs and the webinars in. And so I would absolutely advocate for that, definitely.
Yes, and Helen's actually come in here and said that it's something that they've been asked about in a CPD session. Helen is an NCSE cash employee, and that she's started to ask her manager about this. So it's really good.
Brilliant. Good. So better watch this space then, Rachel. You've started something.
Yeah. And Emma says that we have a placement network available, but a more centralised one would be a benefit. So that's great. And Nikki, the information will be sent out and the webinar will be available for viewing. So yes, you will be able to share it with your team. So I know there's a few questions on this box that I haven't answered, but I think that Janet has answered most of them in a roundabout fashion. Any that we haven't actually answered directly, we will put on that FAQ document for you. But I think we've given you quite a broad view of the placement questions that you've put through. What I'd like to do is just move it forward slightly now. And if I can get my screen to move, that would be even better. Okay, so
We're there.
We're there. So moving forward, Janet, would you like to run through this, and I'll pick it up after your summary?
Yeah, definitely. So we want to continue having some of these webinars. I mean, if we were doing it sort of in a different way, in fact, I don't think we'd have the opportunity to do this face to face, to be honest, because this is an opportunity where webinars have really come into their own and allowed us to actually get together and almost create our own little beginning of a network in a way. So we do want to move these forward, and we want to continue having them. So there is a plan to have another session sort of mid-November, early December. We're thinking sort of towards the end of that first term, just to see how things are going, really, for us, for Karina and I, to be able to reflect on any of the other questions or any information that might have come to light, and also to share with you information from other centres, really, in terms of, you know, our placements. Are we in a better position? Have things sort of, are there more challenges in terms of accessing placements and so on? So we'll be able to talk about the sorts of things that I think you were thinking about, Rachel, in that network, in that forum, and we can perhaps structure something that becomes yours. And if this is the way of creating that sort of network and forum, we can do that, and we can arrange perhaps for individuals and set from centres to actually present and to actually share some of their experiences and so on. So we could always have a guest speaker, maybe. So we do want these types of things to carry on, and to make sure that we're with you and we're supporting you. What we won't allow is for a situation to get to the end of another academic year where we are still sort of looking at the whys and wherefores. We need to be moving forward together with this. So we really want to stay in touch. Thank you, Karina.
Yes, and thank you, Janet. And just in the question boxes again, please bear in mind the timing of the next session. Those of us in colleges will be on timetable. Yes, I think probably late in the day it's going to end up being a twilight session, so that we can make sure that we allow as many people as possible to attend. So we will bear that in mind. And also thank you for your thanks, Michael. I'm glad that you're finding it informative. Okay, so moving along, Janet, would you like to just do a bit of a summary of the meeting today, please?
Yeah, sorry, Karina, you did ask me to do this. So just to summarise what we've done today, we've recapped a little bit about that first placement programme and about its aims and intentions. So the idea of giving students something meaningful and purposeful that is anchored to the practical skills, that is preparing them for effective and efficient engagement in those competencies. We looked at that. That is the purpose of the placement programme. We talked about how this would become complementary and supplementary evidence. We've looked at specific questions and answers. There are still some things that are frustratingly out of our control, but we know what they are. And I think that's what's important, is that we've got an eye on them, and we are working with people to be able to get clear and consistent messages. We are you know, we are with you, we are on your side, we want what you want, and we want, you know, at the end of the day, this is about the students being able to achieve, to be motivated to learn, and for that teaching and learning experience to be a happy one, and for everyone involved. So we want that as well. We are very mindful of employers and what employers need, and making sure that we're able to sort of close the loop on that, and sort of create a forum here. I'm pinching your words now, Rachel, but to create some professional network here that is actually working together to be able to improve things and make sure students have a teaching and learning experience that is purposeful and meaningful. And the idea of looking at those competencies together and looking at ways that they can be achieved is very important and critical to what we've done, and we will continue to engage with that as well. But there are other things that we've got in mind, Karina, is that right?
There is other things that we have in mind, yes, Janet. So what I'd like to do is firstly say don't disappear quite yet, even though I'm on the thank you, because yes, of course we want to thank you for coming today, and it's always really interesting to hear from our centres and to understand your problems and try and help alleviate them where we can. And it's also really good to talk, well in this case to type, but you know what I mean. So again, thank you. During sessions like this, we often get questions, and contributors will often say it'd be useful to have a chat, but these are specific questions which not everyone will be interested in, or they may come through via email, and Janet and I will respond, but we often end up with quite a long email trail, which is of course fine. But Janet and I have been thinking about ways in which we could open up our time and have one-to-ones or one-to-two chats with those of you who would like some time with us. So we've come up with what we're calling our open surgery. Our first open surgery will be held on the 8th of October. And you can email into me for a slot. Just give us an outline of what you'd like to discuss and an approximation of the time you would like, about up to half an hour. And then I'll send you a Teams invitation to attend a session with Janet and I during the day on the 8th. We do hope that these sessions will become regular slots in our calendars, depending on demand. And we really do hope that it'd be helpful for you to have time to chat about specific subjects in a 2-to-1 session. So my email address should have appeared on the screen for you. Yeah, it is there.
Yes.
And it's on the last slide as well. But really what we want to do is just thank you for coming along today, and we hope that you found it useful. And of course, please do get in touch if you've got any questions. So if I can get to the next screen, you'll see both Janet and I's email address. We are obviously here to answer any questions that you have, and we hope that you found the session really helpful today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Karina, and thanks to everyone who's taken the time out of their busy schedules to be able to join the webinar. We really sincerely do appreciate that, and together we'll get this done. I don't like to coin that phrase. I've heard a few people say that of late, but we can work together on this one.
Yes, it'll be very good. Oh, thank you all so much for your lovely comments. It's really nice to see that we've had a good session with you this afternoon. Don't forget to look out for the next one, end of November, early December. And of course, if you want a slot at our open surgery, then please do send me an email. So with that, I'll say goodbye. Thank you very much.